Hey everyone, welcome to the seventh and final episode of season one of The Hidden Work of Leadership. In this first season, we took up the question, what is the hidden work of leadership when life is in flux? For me, it has been such a privilege to talk with and learn from our guests, business leaders, authors, therapists, and more, as they describe for us how they were formed as leaders in the midst of disruption. I'll also say that I'm grateful for those of you who have reached out saying how helpful you found the podcast or ideas about who we should interview next. Know that we're already planning for season two, and I can't wait to tell you more about it soon. But for this final episode of season one, Lisa is going to flip the script a bit and interview me. I talk about parenting, marriage, and my role as the executive director of Dupree Center. So let's get into it, and thanks again for listening.
All right. Well, here we are, coming up on the end of this first season of the Hidden Work of Leaders podcast that I've had the pleasure of co-hosting with Michaela. And today we're going to flip the script. If you've been listening along, you know that in every episode, starting with me, we interviewed people around a set of kind of common questions, and I am gonna ask those questions of Michaela today and get some insight into her leadership and her seasons of disruption. And I'm excited to do that. I think it's going to be fun. So let's jump right in. Good to see you, Michaela.
Good to see you. Fun for you. I feel a little nervous.
Do you? I promise. I'll be gentle. I will.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Only a little nervous. The good nervous.
Good nervous. Yeah. It does feel funny, doesn't it, to be on the other side of the interview process, and it is a little vulnerable. So thank you for doing this and stepping in. You will remember, because you wrote these questions. The first question is really kind of taking a look a little bit behind the kimono to say, what makes you, Michaela, uniquely you, particularly in terms of how you live and lead.
Yeah, it's a good question. One that I think I've come to understand more clearly in layers and over time, right? Mm-hmm. So I just think that's just something worth saying up front. I think part of what makes me, including me as a leader, is that I am like relentlessly optimistic. Mm-hmm. And not in like let's ignore the hard things and not talk about them or not look at the things. I just really believe that a lot is possible. And I think that optimism and hope is a gift and is contagious in environments in which I am. And the other thing I would say, and I don't know if this makes me uniquely me, but certainly a leadership attribute, a human attribute, I really love people. I love them. I think they're interesting. I want to ask them a lot of questions. I want to learn more about them. I love when people come alive. I love when they're at their best self. I love kind of the unique recipe that happens when you put different people together. So those two things combine to really make me a person who can imagine potential and then see how people fit in and make, to make that potential possible, or the people that I'm around reshape my sense of what I think is possible. So the optimism and the strong commitment to people, I think that's what makes me who I am as a leader.
Yeah, you said a word, and I want to stop on it for a minute, and I'm sure you know which word it is. It's the word potential. And part of how I have come to know you is as someone who is drawn to potential and drawn to whether it's people potential or organizational potential. You could look at a bowl of, a set of salad materials and see potential in how that salad could come together. And I'm curious how that's shaped some of your leadership. I totally get and see you as the optimistic and hopeful leader. You bring hope and inspiration and your deep care for people. But I think this piece about potential adds a dimension.
Yeah. Um, Part of it is just that I'm wired strategically, right? So I
Mm,
sort
yeah.
of see sometimes 17 steps out ahead. It can be a little bit taxing at times, or even uh, confusing when you can see 17 steps out ahead in 8 different directions, right? So you can see the potential in a lot of different directions. And sometimes I'm like, well, how do you decide? How do you go
Yeah.
forward? So that's where the other people piece is so huge for me. But then I think there is a deeply theological component to this.
Mm,
Um, I really love the creation story. I love when God's making things, when Jesus is making things new. That's a very compelling piece of the Christian narrative that I think gets uniquely played out in the way we work and live and
yeah.
act. And so the potential piece for me, it's a lot of energy. I've had to grow, and I think I'm still growing and being disciplined and not pursuing every path for potential, and not assuming, and I've learned this the hard way, not assuming that everybody in my work or personal orbit is as energized by the potential and thinks it's as fun to go after it as I do. So just kind of a measured approach, like, okay, what's reasonable, what's actually going to take energy from people more than give it to them, or I thought it was just the opposite. But yeah, I do. I love looking out on the horizon and seeing things. Like one super small example, a friend of ours just bought a new place, and it is a total gut job. And I
Mm,
walked in and I was like, this is amazing. And I walked through it. I was like, you could do this, this, to this. And then I looked at her face. And I was like, oh, she's like hardcore stressed right now.
yeah.
And Lisa, we talk a lot about how people perceive change and really kind of these big inflection moments through the lens of the Enneagram. And right there in that moment, I was like, "Oh, she's a present person."
Right. Yeah.
And so this
She's
is
not
very
there
stressful
yet.
to her. Yeah, 100%. So I there's ongoing growth curves in knowing who else is around me, and that they might not be as wired or as far out in the future as I am. But
Yeah.
yeah, I do love potential, and I think it's a unique opportunity to participate in what God's doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's always working and creating around us, and the opportunity to join him when we see something that looks like it has potential and it's hopeful, and we can move towards it. And learning to govern that right properly is also part
Yeah,
of the always
yeah.
part of the journey. Every strength has a shadow, as I certainly know from my own journey. Let's, as we've talked to other folks, one of the places that we've zoned in is on a season in their own life that was in flux, referencing back to the title of our book, where they were going through some significant change and disruption, and kind of what was going on and how they navigated through it, and what some of the pain points were and what they learned. And I'm going to ask you to reveal a little bit here in a personal situation or work situation, that you whatever you want to do. But I want to get a little insight into some of your own growth work and your own inner work, because I know you've done a ton.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, and this premise that you and I have talked so much about over the years, and is at the heart of our book, and is at the heart of the Dupree, all of our efforts, including our research, which is that great leaders are often made, not born, and usually through a series of challenging things,
Right.
and by embracing this kind of inner work. And that inner work is not always on display. Sometimes it's more hidden. And yeah, our book is a whole book about that kind of hidden work when life is in flux and when you're in transition points. And in some ways, Lisa, I feel like my life has been in flux for a while. I
Mm,
was like, where it all feels very gray, like where are the lines of one transition point to another? And I found myself like, going sort of like filing through some big professional transitions, filing through some personal ones that have happened over the last 5 years, but and going all the way back even to childhood and being like, oh yeah,
Mm,
these ones really shaped me too. But the one where I landed for our conversation was actually when I became a mother and I became a
mm,
parent. Um, it was like so a lot of people there. I know a lot of people who are like, "Oh, it's like the most beautiful, wonderful, greatest thing ever," and it was just like all my dreams come true. And there's obviously a lot of people who really struggle on the path toward parenthood, or may not even
right.
choose parenthood. And so, just the spectrum of realities, I would fit into the. I imagined myself having kids, but when I got there, it was way different,
Mm,
way harder, and while I love my children from the very first moment, the tasks that were associated with motherhood were just like not in my skill set, right? They
mm,
were these very, we just talked about how I'm like way out in the future and
right.
strategic, visionary. And it's like, great, but how many diapers did you change today? And could you get this child who needs you to not cry so much? And it was a really difficult time.
Yeah.
And it honestly, Lisa, kind of like shattered me in terms of
Mm,
like who I was and how I moved through the world. And there's a lot of ways that I show up today that are very different than ways I would have shown up in the world a decade ago. Some ways are the same, like I'm still
sure.
me, right? But other ways are very different. And when I go back to what were the turning points there?
Yeah.
I find myself going back to the birth of my first child. So becoming a parent, that was the big influx moment that I think has shaped me in massive ways today.
Yeah, there is nothing quite like becoming a parent that requires you to be fully present, or
Yeah.
demands that you be fully present even when you're not quite able to, right? That this child in front of you needs something and you've got to pay attention to what they need and try and figure out what it is, and they're not communicating other than crying, which is adds stress to the whole situation. Yeah, I can see that. Take me a little further out from the journey. So now your kids are 8 and 5. Is that right? Did I get that right?
You're so close.
Okay.
9 and basically 6.
Okay. So I'm a year off. Okay. I have them
You're off.
trapped in
It's very
2023.
close.
Sorry.
It's very close. Yeah.
Evelyn and Sage. So obviously they're grown now. You've navigated a move across the country with your family, and what have those early lessons? How have those early lessons shaped not just your role as a leader, but your role in family life now? And it's different, right? Your kids are a little more independent. They can get their own juice box.
Mhm.
It's but they still need you.
Yeah. Like, so two stories, one from today, because it's fresh of mind, and one from when my daughter was 3 weeks old. So my daughter, she just like, we all, babies are different. She was one of the kind of babies who cried a lot, just a lot.
Mhm.
And we had like a friend that came over and she said to me, this baby is deeply like emotionally connected to you.
Oh,
And she will stop crying when you take a deep breath, when basically you are
oh,
regulated.
wow. Yeah.
And I was like, what? But then I sort of like came back into my own body, came back into the present. That can be
Mm,
hard. That's been a learning curve for me, how to be just very present in a particular moment, especially to emotions and emotions that I'd rather just that feel difficult for whatever reason, feel painful. And I remember learning how to like literally like regulate my own nervous system, get in touch with my own like heartbeat and breathing as a way to help her like stop
mm,
crying. And I was like, whoa, that's wild. So today we like, kids, they have many things they do. And one of my kid had like a performance that she was going to do at school today. And I was up there at, this morning watching her do the performance. And when all the kids walked in, she didn't come in. And I was like,
Mm,
oh, like, where is she? And I like looked back and I could tell like she was overwhelmed and it was like just a lot for her. And 10 years ago, Michaela would have found it very difficult to stand up out of my own chair, walk back quietly to where she was, and just be with her as
mm,
she processed through how she needed to go forward. I would have wanted to fix it. I would have
yeah,
wanted to manage it. I would have felt embarrassed that, it wasn't happening in the way I wanted it to happen. And today
yeah,
I just went back and it was like no big deal. And I just went and sat with her and put my arm around her. And 5 seconds later, she was ready and she like did all that work herself. And
yeah,
that had nothing to do with me. And so that capacity to just be with things while they're bumpy now
yeah,
shows up in my everyday like life and leadership. And my kid taught me that. Like literally my
yeah,
kid taught me how to do that. And you can imagine how that plays out with team members and with
sure,
like folks who are customers or clients or friends or donors, the many, many people for which there are many, many bumps on a, given day. And now I'm one of these people where people are like, hey, I'm kind of telling you my life story. Do you usually get that? And I'm like, I didn't used to be that person, but now I am.
yeah.
So that's just a very small real time example of how motherhood is pretty radically rewired how I can show up.
Yeah, it's not so small, I don't think. And I want to, you said you really didn't do anything, but you did. You were present with her and you held some space for her to do her own processing. You've equipped her, and she's grown and matured, so she can regulate herself now, as long as you're there. Not always, but more, as she gets older and older. But you were there. You recognized what the need was, and it was, I just need to go sit with her. And in the language of adaptive leadership, that's holding space, right? And from a leadership, you said this shows up all the time in your leadership. Let's switch there a little bit,
Hmm.
because I think we talk a lot about this in the book, and learning, for all of us, regardless of Enneagram type or work style, the work of learning to be present, which is different than having an orientation to the present. For those of you who are Enneagram savvy, um, is where most of the work is, right? For all of us, and it changes and evolves over time. And it caught, so how do you get there, right? Let's get a little practical here. And how does it show up in your leadership when you begin to recognize the environment is what we sometimes call anxious, or highly volatile?
Hmm. Yeah, anxious, highly volatile, and then sometimes just human, just like
Yeah,
people bumping up
right.
against each other, right? So it's these these lower volatility moments. How do you reduce the temperature? You mentioned the phrase adaptive leadership, which comes from Ronald Heifetz and Marty Linsky out of Harvard Business School, and there's a really wonderful analogy in there about the difference between being a thermometer and a thermostat, right? We need
Mm,
both skills are valuable. Can you go in and can you read the temperature of a room? Do you have emotional intelligence? Can you connect to the present? Can you get a sense of what's going on?
yeah,
And then in the right moment, in the right way, and not not in a manipulative way, but in a value add way, can you help regulate when the
that's right.
temperature is either too hot or when the temperature is too cold and people need to kind of get moving? And one of the huge ways that happens for me is something we talk about in the very first chapter of our book, which is moving from reacting to responding.
Bonding, right.
I so this is I literally think about this in not as much anymore because it feels like I've grown some muscles here, but there was a period in which every meeting I was in, like people would say something, we'd see some of those bumps, maybe the volatility, maybe some anxiety, and my instinct would be to like manage it, to solve it,
Mm-hmm.
uh to my coach has called me, she's like, your tendency to be a shock absorber, like you want to absorb like
Mm,
the points where it's difficult. And Max Dupree, the man whose center I lead that bears his name, has this amazing line in terms of the role of leaders, which leaders are supposed to absorb pain, not inflict it.
right.
um so that, but what does that mean? And how do you not rush to absorb pain that really is work that ought to be given back to people? It's another
Right.
Heifetz phrase. So a lot of my work is about timing. It's about
Yeah.
timing. So do I respond? Do I react right away? And somebody said something and I like kind of jump in, or, do I give it a beat? If we're in an
Hmm.
offsite meeting, we're all in a person and we're all in a room. Do I tell myself at the beginning, you're going to be the last one to talk, not the first, not the second, not the third,
Right.
not the fourth, not the fifth, the last. When we're in a Zoom meeting, is my practice to keep myself on mute and to count in my head to 10 when there's a pause, and to let somebody else in certain kinds of moments. Other times of moments, it
Sure.
is my space to go in faster,
Yeah.
but it's a lot of regulation on being
That's
present to
right.
kind of the empty space and airspace. And
Hmm.
I'm so I would consider myself a reflective and emotionally intelligent person. And most of my meetings are in digital spaces. So
Mm.
learning how to do that in digital spaces, I mean, I think we've all been on that learning curve the last five
Sure.
years, the last 4 years. So how does it get practical? It comes very much into singular moments of not reacting, giving more space to respond, which usually looks like being quiet more often.
Yeah. Yeah, I have found too that sometimes the best thing to do, not always, but sometimes, is to be able to simply acknowledge what the other person is experiencing without agreeing with it or reacting to it. I see you're upset by this, right? And there's a little bit of, your mom's a therapist, there's some therapeutic language in here that can be helpful. But when people feel acknowledged and heard, that goes a long way to calming, the waters a little bit so that we can have the harder conversation. And I think that's part of this too. But you can't do that unless you've paused and stepped back and said, okay, what is my response here? And it may be
Yeah.
just to be silent, and it may be to acknowledge and put a little shape to it. But that's
Hmm.
the move from reaction to response, I think, is probably the single biggest thing that everyone in Western culture could learn how to do and benefit from, right? We're
Hmm.
very reactive, and it creates drama. It creates lots and lots of angst and tension between people and in systems. So, um, anything else you want to comment on around, your own life and leadership right now, and kind of what you're learning? We wrote this book together. It's been out for a few months. We're gonna record another episode, kind of recapping the series. But just from your perspective, what surfaced for you personally in your own world?
Yeah, I think what you just said has been really big, which is just being able to acknowledge how people are
Mhm.
feeling, whether it's a friend or a
Yeah,
coworker. I can like like my I just move fast. I've learned that I move very fast, and part of that, my fast motion, can be experienced by other people as I've moved past their
yeah,
emotions too quickly. And in my mind, I'm like, well, we did that. And I cared so deeply. And just
yeah,
the, just the practice of sitting longer than I would naturally do, and letting people, whether it's my kid or whether it's someone on my team or a friend or my husband, just sitting, like letting them drive the pace and not
yeah.
going at my pace, has been huge. I think I'll keep learning that lesson for like the next decade plus, maybe my whole life. But it's been really, really rich and rewarding. And then maybe the sort of part two of that is when I have moved too fast, or when I have hurt somebody, like I'm really okay saying sorry. I'm really okay acknowledging that. I'm
Yeah.
really okay. That part has never been. I don't feel pain. I don't feel that. That's not what I feel there. I don't have a. But it still like goes a long way to just really say it. So
Hmm.
learning to do the first, and then when I mess up, leaning into the second.
Okay. Yeah,
Um,
that's awesome. Thank you. Um, I think those are words of wisdom for all of us. You and I are both what's called future-oriented types on the Enneagram, and we bring big energy to what we do, and our energy can over in different ways. We're different types, but we can overtake the room, whether it's a virtual room or a real room. We can overtake the room with our energy without even realizing we're doing it, because it's just how we show up. So it requires a lot of kind of self-management, self-regulation. So as we bring this to a close, here's the fun question we've asked everyone else. What would Michaela today, I don't want to reveal your age, you can do that if you want, but I won't do it. What would Michaela today say to younger Michaela? I don't know whether it would be 20-year-old Michaela or 30-year-old Michaela. What would Michaela, the Michaela who shows up today, want the younger version of you to know?
I'm 41, so I will reveal. I think that I would tell younger Michaela, first of all, I just want to encourage her. Like, hey, this is like, you're good. Like, this is going to be good. You know, you're going to meet a lot of people and they're going to love you and you're going to love them. The work's going to be good. And, God's going to become a big part of your life. All those big things. But the thing that I would want to tell younger Michaela is just, and this I feel like I make decisions every day that test this value right now. And over the last however many years, is that just like people matter most, like relationships matter most. Like nothing else is worth anything if it doesn't do right by, care for people, and that you, Michaela, are part of those people. And so like caring for yourself,
Right.
Asking yourself what you want, all of those things are really good and really valid. So people matter most, and like, don't lose yourself in that, I think is what I'd say.
Yeah, that's so good. And many of us need that reminder over and over again, right? That if we are caring for others, particularly in roles of leadership, it's easy to lose sight of our own needs and requirements so that we can stay whole. You know, it's the old, airline, put your own oxygen mask on first before you put it on your children. But as a mom, as a parent, as someone responsible for other people, the impulse is often to put their oxygen mask on first at your own expense. And I think that's a good word to finish our interview on. So thank you, Michaela. This was fun. How did it feel to be on the other side of the interview?
Well, you're a good friend and I trust you. So it actually felt great.
Thank you for tuning in to the Hidden Work of Leadership. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and found it insightful. The Hidden Work of Leadership is brought to you by the Max Dupree Center for Leadership at Fuller Seminary, where we envision a world in which leaders across industries and seasons of life are deeply formed as the people of God so that they might seek the very best for the people and systems entrusted to their care. Our episodes are produced by Justin Heap, who ensures our engineering and editing is engaging and sounds just right. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing us on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps us reach more listeners like you. You can also follow the Dupree Center on LinkedIn and Instagram for updates and behind-the-scenes content. For more information about today's episode and access to additional resources, visit our website at dupree.org. That's DEPREE.org. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on The Hidden Work of Leadership.